gentlemen, boys, girls, welcome to the den of the man of letters. Today, tonight, this evening, this morning, whenever this hour shall come, we speak of giants walking among us. We speak of Atlantis and the Lemurians, Hyperboreans, aliens. Ancient civilizations didn't build the pyramids. We did. Welcome to Tataria.
The One World Tartarians, the greatest civilization ever erased from history, by James W. Lee. Intro Deduction. Once upon a time, there was a highly advanced civilization, today known as Great Tataria. She was disappeared from our history books less than a century ago. Its vestiges are still everywhere. This civilization dominated technologies more advanced than the present ones. Its geopolymer concrete was eternal and grew stronger over time. Its gigantic iron and glass structures, surmounted by domes and metal needles, were present on every continent. Associated with Mercury, they distributed free atmospheric energy to everyone. Its towers and railway stations are still in operation. Unfortunately, the technology of free energy from the ether was destroyed and imprisoned, and old technology reintroduced, like cables and wires to distribute energy and make handsome profits. The story goes that Nikola Tesla had discovered the technology to connect to the ether and provide unlimited power to everyone, anywhere, at any time. You could travel by boat, car, plane, for free by simply accessing nature's magnetrical energy that is omnipresent, and we have not been allowed this free energy, all due to our capitalist capitalizing system of greed and domination by those in power, even to this day. So for over 100 years, we have been denied a benevolent system of free energy to all Mr. Tesla, if he even existed, was a front man to hide the Tartarian free energy devices you will see detailed extensively in this book. The fake history has been called the ancient architecture, as Moorish revival or Moresque, and Islamic, and also colonial, medieval, neoclassical, Baroque, Romanesque, Gothic, Beaux Arts, Eclectic, Tudor, Renaissance, Palladian, Richardsonian Romanesque, Chicago School, or Victorian, and labeled them as fashionable styles to hide the old and true function of its columns, arched openings, pinnacles, rose windows, naves ornamented with iron columns, towers, and domes, in addition to having cut the ends of the pinnacles in the photographs or add crosses that did not exist before. His story tells us that the first power stations were first established in Cairo, Egypt in 876, according to Wikipedia. It is the largest and oldest in Egypt, in its original form. All Tataria power stations, small and large, had pipe organs to harmonize and heal the population through sound waves, what is now known as cymatics. The churches and cathedrals we see throughout the world all share similar design patterns that were designed with sacred acoustic geometry to maximize vibration, tone, and resonance to heal and help download higher consciousness. After the Great Purge of the Tartarians, the religious orders, spearheaded by the Romanovs, reconstituted these amazing structures into Presbyterian, Catholic, Anglican, Mormon, synagogue, mosque, temples, etc., etc. Russian scholar Anatoly Fomenko wrote a most important series of a 7-volume book series called History, Science of Fiction, where he proves that modern written history only dates back to 1200 AD. This dovetails with the creation of the trilateral New World Order, founding of the Vatican, City of London, and Washington, D.C. The United States is defined as a federal corporation under U.S. Code 3002, Section 15. The Virginia Company was turned into the United States during the non-occurring Revolutionary War by the Freemasonic founding fathers who were serving the Grand Lodge of England. The Virginia Company was issued by the British royal family from the City of London Corporation for North American settlements. In 1213, King John surrendered the Kingdom of England to the Holy. See under the Golden Bull. In 1215, under direct papal authority, King John issued the Magna Carta, Latin for Great Charter, and that established the 1-mile square block called the City of London Corporation as a sovereign entity from England and London. The Holy See uses Latin for official documents, and the Vatican uses Latin as its official language. Novus Ordo Seclorum is Latin and translates to the New Order of the Ages, and is on the United States Great Seal and United States $1 bill. Washington, D.C. is located in both Virginia and Maryland. That is Virgin Mary Land. D.C. was originally called Rome in 1669, which it stated in the Catholic Encyclopedia. D.C. is Roman architecture, and Capitol Hill is named after Capitoline Hill in Rome. The ancient Roman fasces symbol is all over federal buildings and federal seals. The federal government is based on the Roman Republic, which was a fascist empire. Rome fasces were where the word fascist comes from. They had bundled caning rods and an axe for anyone who disagreed with Roman laws. The Colonna family ceremonially ruled over Capitoline Hill, which represents political power of Rome's corporate empire. The column symbolizes the political support that maintains their claim to governmental land ownership. Washington, D.C. is Roman architecture and has the Roman fasces symbol all over U.S. federal buildings and U.S. seals. Fascism means a centralization of power. Capitol Hill is named after Capitoline Hill in Rome. The NWO also rewrote history during the revision of history during the epic reset between the mid-1800s until the 1930s, when Court Hofjuden David Rockefeller, along with the Rothschilds, Red Shield, began the many stories of the Big Bang, evolution, and the history of religious myth and lore. The Court Hofjuden were /are the Akanashi Jewish people were conscripted by the Vatican to be allowed to make all the money and all the fame as long as the Vatican, Jesuits, and 13 satanic bloodlines would be provided with information and power. The Vatican set up confessionals for the same purpose and runs a worldwide spy spook agency called the Entity, which owns and controls all major spy agencies including the CIA, NSA, MI6, Mossad, etc. This is all part of their one world order, as stated in Latin on the back of the US dollar bills. The old world order were the benevolent Tartarians. One of their only primary directives was that what you take back from nature, you give back more. Their nature/nurtures was based on Isis, the moon goddess, who created and provided for all. One can only conclude, given the extremely similar structures we see throughout the world, that all lived in common language and were all related in common thought, intention, and design. They had healing centers for animals. They had passive relations with all life because they had advanced their consciousness to emanate love and benevolence to all. Their flag was of a griffin, which was a real animal. The griffin is part human, part eagle, part lion, and part androgynous bull. It appears from their maps and legends that there also existed centaurs, flying turtles, and unicorns. They then, we can only surmise, that the entire Tartarian people were destroyed when the NWO learned how to use the Tatari technology and use it to destroy the entire culture and erase their existence from modern history books of today. If you look carefully at the photos and images in this book, you will see these massive buildings, and that would mean that there were hundreds of millions, maybe even tens of billions of Tartarians that were eliminated. When the healing technology was used to destroy life, we find millions of bones buried under cities and massive insane asylums, where they likely imprisoned the adult Tatars after they had been separated from their children, to be sold for slave labor and shipped on founding trains, that had crematories and large graveyards on their sites. And did the once great Tartarians enjoy a one common language, as the Tower of Babel suggests? Britain has over 44 dialects alone. So now do we languish in our languages created by the NWO order and Phoenicians so that our definitions are to deaf Phoenicians, and we babble on and on with all the varying dialects, idioms, and Roman Latin etymologies? The New World Order we see unfolding today likely genocided the Tatars under the spiritual mind and body control of Lucifer and Satan. Some of these mind-controlled NWO are called blue bloods due to their blood being of higher copper content than non-Rh negative bloodline humans. The Rh negative bloodline allows genealogical DNA traits to pass on, whereas any contamination of positive bloodlines corrupts the purity of the bloodlines. Most are not even aware that all US presidents have negative blood, and their lineage can be traced back to King Charles II of the 17th century and Vladimir the Impaler, aka the original Dracula. Throughout the world, invading forces that defeated Tataria appropriated their palaces and red power stations and turned them into universities, museums, theaters, banks, prefectures, chambers of commerce, stock exchanges, churches, high schools, courts, banks, post offices, libraries, opera theaters, biomedical research institutes, casinos, and tourist attractions, as well as cathedrals, synagogues, and churches, and rewrote their history chronicled in the collective Wikipedia. And they continue to paint the structures that extract energy from the ether with the same colors as Tataria, and keep destroying. Tataria was the whole world. Asia, Africa, Europe, Oceania, and all the Americas were part of a single high civilization and had the architecture focused on the extraction of magnetic energy. Great Tataria was then divided into civilizational categories like the Ottoman Empire, Byzantine Empire, and the Ross Empire. These changes were then archived into the likes of Throne Room of the Grand Kremlin Palace in Moscow, the National Archives of Britain, and the Library of Congress in Washington. The NWO parasites also interrupted the astronomical clocks of Tataria because they used the geocentric model to represent the solar system. In the Tartarian astronomical clocks, the Earth was at the center of God's creation. These clocks were complex calculating machines. They used terms like computus, and to operate them, sophisticated mathematical knowledge was required. The invaders invented the heliocentric model and the Copernicus character, among many others, to be able to recreate the history of humanity and erase traces of their recent crimes and destruction of the great civilization of Tataria. To be very clear, Tataria was the whole world with one unified language and design. How could the many pyramids found all over the world incorporate the same thought and designs if the Tatars were not all connected somehow? Where are the design plans? We will see over and over again how 1. Fires were said to destroy most of the structures. 2. Architectural drawings and blueprints are never made available. 3. Iron forgery plants not located. 4. Where the stones, bricks, copper, iron, etc. came from. Or 5. How these massive structures and incredible engineering feats were accomplished. Would they not be sharing all their amazing know-how with us all? Yet you will find very little, if any, available literature on any of the above. Now, the architecture to extract energy. The world architecture for electromagnetic energy extraction derives entirely from the high civilization Tartarian. It is characterized by the use of arch openings, columns, domes, and towers. In addition to details such as rose windows and muqarnas, symbols of the vibration of electromagnetic energy, which acts on molecules and changes the behavior of cells. Formerly, these waves could act in healing, levitation, and transport, besides provoking feelings like harmony and euphoria. This energy can now be used in another way. The architecture of Tataria undergoes slight modifications and influences according to the local characteristics of climate, culture, and material resources, but maintains the basic principles throughout the world. You will find that the pyramids, theaters, and colosseums all had water channels running under them directly where the sound energy was directed. The star forts seem to have been designed to create microdomes that protected the inhabitants and resonated harmony. This was detailed in Tesla's 3-dimension shell, is created by interfering 2 Fourier expansion, 3-dimensional scalar hemispherical patterns in space, so they pair couple into a dome-like shell of intense, ordinary electromagnetic energy. The air molecules and atoms in the shell are totally ionized and thus highly excited, giving off intense glowing light. Anything physical which hits the shell receives an enormous discharge of electrical energy and is instantly vaporized. It gets zapped, like a bug hitting one of the electrical bug killers now so much in vogue. The elite survived by utilizing them during the resets. Look at some old depictions of star forts that were surrounded by walls of mud and remained mostly undamaged. Imagine a society that created free energy with the classical arts and whose jobs were musical in nature. On the solfeggio scale, 528 Hz is significant. These sound frequencies we created made plants, humans, and animals grow larger and maintained a temperate climate. All cities located at strategic points on Earth along canals, rivers, seas, lakes, and oceans were star fortresses and had electromagnetic energy extracted from the ether. The energy was then captured through towers and obelisks and stored in the red and white striped power stations of the high civilizations, lately called Great Tataria. They always had a water fountain nearby. The electromagnetic energy was extracted and stored in toroid coils at the power plant summits, covered with copper, positioned below the towers. Star fortresses coordinated the distribution of water, gas, and electromagnetic energy throughout the Earth, ran the world food and transport system, was responsible for all communications, health, education, culture, and well-being. Underground tunnels, magnificent communicating vessels with platforms and palaces interconnected all the cities around the world, running in disruption. Through them were billions of people, luggage, objects, correspondence. On the surface, well-planned cities, magnificent buildings, huge parks, power plants, music, culture, art. In the sky, immense airships for those who prefer to observe the world from a bird's point of view. An inaccessible world, forever lost, whose traces can only be found in yellowed photographs and the contemplation of buildings whose architecture seems incomprehensible by today's standards of understanding. Great Tataria had no colonies. It was a one-world civilization, united in common understanding and speaking the same language: Tatar, Arabic, and Sanskrit. A one-world civilization without frontiers, with independent nations ruled by qualified princes, elected by a local council of wise men but counseled by women. Colonies were an invention of the British Jesuit Empire, which defeated this once beautiful civilization, enslaved their white and black people, addicted them to opium and other drugs, turned the fragile nations into colonies to rob and destroy it, and erased all the worldwide white cities. Then, they installed their puppets in every government and rewrote all of the history. Public schooling founded by the Rockefeller and Rothschild court Hofstudents successfully reprogrammed our historical narrative once the children were separated from their parents. It is said that once one generation believes something is true, the next generation assumes it. The Tartarians are the cradle of civilization as the survivors and descendants of Hyperborea. Hyperboreans were the first inhabitants of the earth. The Scythian Tartarians are the supervisors from Hyperborea. They taught to the world their advanced technologies, always respecting the local culture and religion and promoting interracial alliances through marriages, since the miscegenation was one of the characteristics of their ancient golden civilization. This is why the DNA Tartarian is in all peoples from Earth. That is why the roots of the Russian language are in all artificial languages created in the 19th and 20th century by the Jesuit parasite scholars led by Joseph Scaliger. In exchange for low taxes, Tataria would offer the protection of its armies, the fearsome Golden Horde. But we were defeated by dew and chemical weapons that were only used for benevolent purposes by the Tartarians. The elimination of the Tartarians occurred less than 150 years ago. Look at today's Russia, officially called the Russian Federation, and you will understand how the world was in the old days. Now, within the present Russian borders live more than 150 different ethnicities whom coexist with different degrees of knowledge and development, and their people speak 200 different languages and dialects. The Russian literacy is 98%. The remnants of the once great Tataria can still be seen there. In the days of Tatari technologies and understanding of the use of frequency, vibration, and energy, the keys to the universe were far more advanced than current ones we understand today. Nikola Tesla was said to have discovered free energy, yet the Tartarians had mastered these universal energies. How did they construct and build out their incredible cathedrals? Did they have gigantic machines to print exquisite ornaments to buildings and others for making canals to join oceans? Creation mythology, or Tartarian advanced manifestation? When rotating inside coils, magnetic fields create electrical charges in a mercury vortex. Hindu energetic complexes exhibit this function at the top of their structures. In a coil of multiple churns of wire, the magnetic field of the churns adds in the center of the coil, creating a stronger field, says Wikipedia. Coils can still be seen at the top of the power supply centers in India. Religions refer to these energy factories as temples. Parmanand complex in Indonesia had originally 240 power stations in a concentric mandala layout. Power plants have metal hoops where the toroidal coil works. Perhaps the mass dumper of the Taipei Tower accumulates this function. Modern towers are already built with the domes themselves, and they are positioned below the pole that stands up to contact with the ether. This metal sphere represents the favorite geometric object of the fictional character Tesla, reports Wikipedia. The Star Fortress in Haiti, Taj Mahal, Hagia Sophia, Pantheon, or Tower of Jewels were production plants and distribution of atmospheric energy, as well as thousands of cathedrals, temples, and palaces around the world. In fact, you will see the 47-story Tower of Jewels in many world exhibitions, including the 1915 San Francisco Pan-Pacific Exhibition. All over the world, the technology of energy extraction through the atmosphere still works perfectly in castles and buildings and palaces and greenhouses, lighthouses, kiosks, fountains, mosques, fortresses, towers, bridges, and cathedrals, and kept the old technological apparatus intact. This apparatus includes elaborate roof grids and small window-like openings. Metal ornaments in the corners of buildings, pointed antennae with ornaments or balls with mercury, metals embedded in masonry and geopolymer concrete, jars containing mercury, cornices, spires, roofs with copper ornaments and structural foundations in iron, among others. This apparatus is also present in the current skyscrapers. The Tataria civilization was likely destroyed in the 19th to 20th century through floods, energy weapons like dew, and scheduled mass exterminations, and the earth was suddenly deserted by billions of people. All the architecture and technology of this superior civilization was stolen and passed into the hands of the NWO, who created the current ignorant civilization. Could it be that these alleged events of the 1800s were the final book burning, history removing knowledge of the Tartarian people? Horse and buggy lies, or so the story goes. Before the invention of the automobile, 1885, and the airplane, 1903. Before the invention of trains and automobiles, animal power was the main form of travel. Horses, donkeys, and oxen pulled wagons, coaches, and buggies. The carriage era lasted only a little more than 300 years, from the late 17th century until the early 20th century. We are told/sold that horse and buggy were the primary vehicles to haul the stones and bricks from quarries to build the incredible edifices seen in this book. And construction of towers as tall as 47 stories were erected without any found engineering design plans, and had statues, lighting, and elegant detail by common workers who, in many cases in the West, had just arrived in those cities. Communications, telegraph, and telephone systems. Now think of all the telegraph poles and then telephone poles that had to be strung throughout cities and countries. Yet you will repeatedly see in the cities of Tatari that many communication poles were wireless and installed everywhere as early as the 1850s. Only in 1851 did railways start to use telegraphy. Prior to that, telegraph wires strung along the tracks were seen as a nuisance, occasionally sagging and causing accidents and even sometimes fatalities. The first commercial telegraph line was completed. The Magnetic Telegraph Company's line ran from New York to Washington in 1846. The final phase of the telegraph's integration occurred between 1857 and 66. In this period, the members consolidated into a national monopoly, and by 1864, only Western Union and the American Telegraph Company remained of the Six Nations. The United States Telegraph Company entered the field by consolidating smaller, independent firms in the 1860s, and operated in the territory of both the American Telegraph Company and Western Union. By 1866, Western Union absorbed its last two competitors and reached its position of market dominance. The period of 1866 through the turn of the century was the apex of Western Union's power. Yearly messages sent over its lines increased from 5.8 million in 1867 to 63 million in 1900. Over the same period, transmission rates fell from an average of $1.09 to 30 cents per message. Western Union's greatest threat came from a new technology, the telephone. Alexander Graham Bell patented the telephone in 1876, initially referring to it as a talking telegraph. The telephone was used in the 1800s only for local calling, but the development in the 1890s of long lines, the telephone offered increased competition to the telegraph. In 1900, local calls accounted for 97% of the telephone's business, and not until the 20th century that the telephone fully displaced the telegraph. As you will also see, the U.S. mail service only began in the early 1850s. The first air mail was transported in 1870 by letters in free balloons. The first stagecoaches to deliver mail on a 2,800-mile southern route between Tipton, Missouri, and San Francisco, California, specified as a 24-day run, but often taking months. So how did all hundreds of world exhibitions and fairs communicate to set up and bring millions of people to their events from all around the world? The destruction caused by Hindenburg marked the surprising and sudden end of the balloon era. 2 years later, the Second World War began, aimed at destroying the threatening and magnificent German industrial park, redefining all geopolitical borders and killing and moving as many civilians as possible. Britain did not admit the idea that Germany supplanted the British-controlled economy in the colony they had founded under the name of the United States, aka the Virginia Corporation. For this, bankers funded the rise of the Hitler myth, a character represented by several actors, among them Kermit Roosevelt, the second child of Theodore Roosevelt, Cecil Rhodes. It is said that history is written by the victors, and you will find yourself repeating over and over as you peruse this book, saying to yourself, wow, I was never taught any of this. It is what we were not taught is likely the truth of what really happened. That the Tartarian history has been nearly completely scrubbed from modern history proves out this point, as well as flat Earth. We've never been to the moon and no planes hit the Twin Towers on 9/11. One can only conclude that all of history is a lie and that we are self-granted permission to create a tabula rasa in our minds, or erase what we thought we knew, and look at the information and documentation provided in this book for a new understanding of her story, of a one-world benevolent society living in elegance, beauty, and harmony, connected deeply, spiritually, mentally, and physically with nature in love and peace. May we one day soon find again and remember and return back to these amazing people called the Tatarians. What If? By Marcia Ramalho. You know that the man did not go to the moon, that the Titanic did not sink under the command of Jesuit Captain Edward Smith, that the owners of the ship pretended it sank just to receive high insurance, that the purpose was never to disappear with some tycoons who opposed the creation of the Fed because they owned the Fed and therefore did not need to die. You know that the Federal Reserve is a private central bank created in 1913 for currency issuance, inflation control, and interest rates, and thus responsible for the all-world economic depressions and the real U.S. debt of $75 trillion. You know that the attacks on RMS Lusitania, Pearl Harbor, and the incident of the Gulf of Tonkin were planned to justify the entry of the U.S. into Vietnam and World Wars. That Hitler was a creation of Wall Street bankers to kill the largest number of Russians and Germans and boost the Holocaust myth. That the creation of a false flag, Dreyfus Affair, gave rise to prejudice and a new word, anti-Semitism, which would be very useful for wearing wolves into the skin of lambs. You know that the sumptuous ship RMS Lusitania, built by Tartarians, was the fastest Atlantic crossing vessel, and was taken by the parasites and their agents, the Grey Men, that the ship had its engines fully powered by electricity from the ether, and so had to sink 2 times by the parasites to be converted and reappear years later with a less chimney and under new names. The Lusitania was indeed the Titanic, the RMS Majestic, and the RMS Queen Elizabeth. You know that an elite Nazi scientist was taken in the post-war to work in the U.S. through Operation Paperclip, that the Nazi Alan Dulles was the CIA director and created the terrorist network responsible for attacks on European capitals since 1980, known as NATO Gladio Operation, that Winston Churchill caused tens of millions of deaths and no fire knocked down the 2 towers in New York. You know that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, that interventions in Kosovo and Afghanistan were to make stratospheric profits with heroin and coke, that children in Sandy Hook did not die, that ISIS is the mercenary army set up by the American, French, British, Israeli intelligence agencies to fight for the creation of the Greater Israel, that Gaddafi and Assad did kill their own people, that more than 80 countries suffered brutal intervention from the deep state, that climate change means weather engineering programs to cause artificial hurricanes, earthquakes, and floods. You know that traces of smoke in the sky of chemtrails contain aluminum nanoparticles going straight to your lungs, that sustainability and transparency mean pesticides and hidden destruction, that the profusion of antennas modify a magnetic resonance to cause diseases, that the media distribute poor quality propaganda in the shape of news, that thousands of counterfeit operations are created to justify more wars, looting, genocide, displacement, restriction of civil liberties, deliberate harm to health, sale of organs, trafficking of children, and huge profits. What if the magnificent civilizations of Tataria were destroyed with the help and planning of inhumane shadowy forces? What if history taught in schools is a gigantic soap opera fraud, with phantom dynasties, events displaced in time in thousands of years that did not exist? What if the Middle Ages were actually a Tartarian golden age that ended just 100 years ago? If the Colossus of Rhodes is the Statue of Liberty? What if the defeat of Great Tataria was recorded in the official history under the names of the fall of Troy, the fall of the Roman Empire, fall of Constantinople, dissolution of the Ottoman Empire, wars for American independence, the collapse of the Qing dynasty, downfall of the Russian Empire, defeat of Austro-Hungarian Empire, and World War I? What if a great flood happened 150 years ago and the world was culturally and technologically much more advanced than today? If unknown parasites generated the cataclysma and took advantage of chaos to seize power, what if between 1865 and 1876 our ancient civilization wrecked under waves of more than 300 meters, and now the buildings have their first floor buried under meters of sand and mud, whose vestige to this day can be easily spotted in cities all over the world? What if Etruscan, Inca, Maya, Chinese emperors, and Egypt had coexisted in the Middle Ages with all other great civilizations to form a single harmonious culture with the same language and DNA, though they have gone down in history with dozens of invented names by Jesuit, Benedictines, Cistercians? What if Hyperborea and the Arctic Circle were the land of our great divine ancestors? What if Jesus Christ were the Byzantine Emperor Andronicus Komnenos, born in Crimea in 1152, son of Russian princess Irana, married to French Agnes, mother of his numerous children, and died in 1185, aged 33? If Buddha, St. George, Apollo, Pythagoras, Genghis Khan, Ruik, and Alexander the Great were replicas of his image without existence in real life? What if the Church has created a wrong solar system theory and blessed all the wars and heinous crimes to kill the human spirit? If a group of parasites are the inventors of a false Christianity and other religions? If these religions worship Satan pretending that they are worshiping God? If Solomon's temple is the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul? If the city initially called Yoros, Jerusalem, Troy, and Constantinople is the true Rome? What if there were no ancient Greek and Roman Empire? If the worldwide rock-carved megaliths are mere Tartarian-created concrete, which becomes more resistant over the centuries? If the real pyramids of Egypt were dismantled by a French mercenary army, if Solomon's temple is the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, if the Wall of China was not built 7,000 years ago and Mao Zedong was a German liberal politician? What if the history of Great Britain was stolen from the Tartarian history so that the insignificant island would acquire the brilliance it never possessed? If the perfidious Albion was a land of thieves and pirates? If King George VI was the dead Duke of Clarence and was crowned 2 times with 2 different names? If Tsar Nicholas II of Russia was his brother who fled to London after being assassinated by the Bolsheviks? If they were both children of Roosevelt, 2 times president of US under different names? What if the Bible was written in the 19th century? If the 40 years of Moses in the wilderness were the years in which the treasurers subordinate to the Scythian Tatar Aryan rulers were confined as punishment for the usury and robbery crimes committed against the great Tartarian Empire? What if some German Dutch merchants and imperial financial agents had rebelled against Great Tataria and decided to create countries, mafias, and monarchies where they could reign and enslave the rest of the world, calling themselves the Chosen Ones, Enlightened Ones, and Elected Ones? What if history is an intricate novel written and performed by very strange people? What if these people are in contemporary photographs using old clothes and other disguises to fabricate non-existent historical characters and ghostly families? What if all this has the purpose to fill the void of our very fully destroyed recent past and history? What if they can live more than we can? What if the Dark Ages were the apogee of advanced Tartarian culture whose traits were systematically erased by the German Calvinist dynasty Romanov, Saxe, Coburg, and Gotha from the House of Wettin? If Prince Albert was the tycoon Cecil Rhodes, Teddy Roosevelt, and Queen Victoria was Henry John Temple, 3rd Viscount Palmerston? What if the true and only French Revolution happened after 1870 and Napoleon III was a simple, untalented painter named Alexander Cabanel who fled to England with his brushes after delivering France from the newly formed German Empire? What if Alexei Nikolaevich, the Tsarevich of Russia of the House of Romanov, murdered in 1918 by the Bolsheviks according to the official narrative, has ruled Russia from 1917 to 1980 under the names of Alexander Kerensky, Alexei Kosygin, and Joseph Stalin? What if Einstein, Poincaré, Faraday, Marconi, Hertz, and Maxwell, among many others, were characters played by some gray men who destroyed the existing high technology of Tataria to give us expensive crumbs in return? What if all worldwide skyscrapers are secretly collecting and using the electromagnetic energy and we are paying for nothing? What if Nikola Tesla had not invented anything at all and Mark Twain had played his role? What if obelisks, churches, mosques, and cathedrals were extremely old Tartarian power plants for the extraction of clean, free, healthy, and wireless electromagnetic energy, and the generation of all types of waves, mainly infrasound? What if they were destroyed or endowed with crosses by the parasites to conceal the original purpose? What if Tartarian palaces were illuminated more than 700 years before a gray man called Thomas Edison began to deprive mankind of free energy and erect monopolies to the benefit of few? What if the American J.P. Morgan was also the maternal grandfather of President John F. Kennedy, the Brazilian Baron of Rio Branco, a member of the Rockefeller clan, and the French author of Les Miserables? What if the highly advanced global civilization of Tataria has been completely disassembled and later destroyed by the parasites between 1900 and 1940 with direct energy weapons? What if the images were later retouched to include false lighting poles and wires, if they populated the ruins with the dead people striding carefree among the wreckage? If they have inserted telegraph and cable placards in the photos, even though San Francisco was totally wireless? If they added fake cranes on top of buildings to pretend they were under construction, and fake skeletons of buildings in a city that would be over 1,000 years old? What if San Francisco was a Tartarian imperial city with more than 10 royal palaces, artificial islands, and a strategic port facing Eurasia and connecting the Americas? if their elaborated buildings had much more than 500 years old, and the sophisticated technology would contradict the story of the foundation of the city in 1776, and all the official history fairy tale, and so it had to be mercilessly burned and erased? What if the parasites who took over the world power were made up of hybrid androgynous men and women with adopted children created in laboratory and genetically modified? What if they systematically falsified their own deaths to play new characters? What if communism, capitalism, socialism, and liberalism were socio-economic theories created to conceal the same form of oppression on the 6 continents? If highly positioned gray eminence acted as Mussolini, Hitler, Lenin, and Trotsky in performances that never left the photographic paper movies, encyclopedias, or the terrain of illusionism to ever happen in real life? Okay, I have decided. This will not be one book. I will release this as a standalone video. This book is comprised of multiple writings from multiple people, all brought to one book, with alternate forms of history and evidence to support it, which is interesting. I will release them. There's sections on the original Americans who could have been Islamic, who could have been black, African, what we call black African Islam, that were in the Americas far before Christopher Columbus came. It talks about the Maya. It talks about the one world. It talks about the one world nation that was the Tower of Babel when they were destroyed and spread across the land and made to speak different languages so they couldn't understand one another. It has supporting evidence for that. So it basically talks about different eras of the world, different historical periods from the world. It's a massive book. So I will focus on one category at a time and release it, and this will have its own playlist. So make sure to follow along, make sure to subscribe and stay updated for this playlist as it gets put out. That way I don't spend the next month and a half on one video. Instead, I can spend the next month and a half on, a dozen videos, all pertaining to Tataria and the old world history, etc., along with the other content on my channel. So I love you guys, and stay tuned. We'll release the next one here, pretty soon. But thank you guys. I appreciate the support. Appreciate the love, and may it be returned to you tenfold. Okay. The truth is out there. The truth is out there.